Thank you. The real Judge Judy. Yes. I do want to thank all of you for coming to this event at such short notice. I'm here in town, or here in the state at least. I'll give you a couple of other lectures. One at the Mayo Clinic tomorrow, another one down in Tucson tomorrow, on Saturday. I'm Judge Judy and her husband, Dr. Stephen Fry, a local physician and medical researcher, I should add, doing some fantastic research at the present time. They have been our host and have been very kind in organizing this whole effort. Also want to introduce my wife too, Campbell. I got into this business, stayed with this business in part because she made me eat my words, as I like to say. As we started learning some of the things that we did over the years, Karen is really the one with our 5 grandchildren, and even our now 7 grandchildren and spouses, of course. She is the one that really got me to stay with it. And so we're all in our family 100% this way. So really, I owe her and have gratitude for that. I also want to thank Kathy for I want to thank Kathy and the Pomegranate Cafe crew here for organizing this evening. It's very nice indeed. Now, for the remarks that I want to give tonight, I've got some slides I want to show you, a few. I'm here, I mean, this topic, first off, let me ask you, how many of you read the China study? Quite a few. Okay, in any case, you'll know that this topic is really quite exciting. I have been in this business for more than, I think it's about 57 years now. Much of it as a faculty member at Cornell University. I've been in research virtually most of that time, as well as in policy development at the national level. So I've gotten sort of an experience both at the policy level, in the public sort of sector, if you will, as well as in research and teaching. And I can tell you, and I'm sure you know, when we're talking about this particular topic, what to eat, it is, of course, very complex. Complex in many ways. Complex from the biological perspective, complex from the societal perspective. And of course, there's a very interesting history. And at the same time, it's very challenging. It's an idea that really does challenge this, many of the institutions of which we have in our country today, and of course, in fact, in any particular society. It's different, as many of you know, it's different. On the one hand, though, I think this information now is so extraordinary in terms of what it can do. In terms of what it can do. I mean, Dr. Fryer just told about some of his patients, and I give most of my lectures now to medical schools around the country, and I'm learning the same thing from other physicians too. Physicians aren't trained in nutrition, to be honest about it, in medical school, as many of you may know. And what I'm finding is that physicians who are learning about this and then starting to use it for their patients for all manner of conditions are getting remarkable results. So I have a lot of passion, a lot of enthusiasm for what this is all about. And so, in fact, I've grown this passion, I guess, for the last 20, 25 years or so, in particular because I've seen what it does. I've seen what it does. And so I've become really interested in promoting it in any way that we can do it. Because I think, from my perspective, almost all the research funding that I got over the years was fairly generous amounts, was actually from the American taxpayer. I did not take money from the corporate sector. It was all from NIH, American Cancer Society, and places like that. And so I feel a sense of responsibility, to be honest about it. Not only in telling what I think we learned, but also going out to the public and saying thank you. Because it was the public's money that was used to allow me and my colleagues to get this information. So in any case, to get to the nub of the question, I am passionate about it. I am trying to promote it. And during the last, I would say, maybe, 10, 15, maybe 20 years, I've become quite active, especially with some in our family. 3 sons, a daughter, some other colleagues, doing some things. And when I start thinking about doing something, I'm thinking about figuring out ways actually to get this out to the public. I'm really interested in transformation. in some way, getting this information, particularly in the medical community, because the medical community are going to have to be the people, the folks who are going to have to take much of the lead in the future as far as this information is concerned. So let me, some of you have any of you heard me speak before? No, not too many. No one. One. Okay. I'm good. Makes me proud. What I want to do then is just in a few brief moments to summarize for you in about 15 minutes. That took about 50 years of work to sort of get to this point. So what I'm going to do is just kind of pick out a couple of ideas. A couple of ideas that relate to the question of what is this information, and also relate to the idea of the challenge of putting this out to the public. And then I'm going to, at the end, share with you a little bit about the kind of projects that we're presently involved in. And of course, that takes funding. And I'm here also to talk about that as well, for any of you who may wish to participate in some way. So I've got a few slides here, Steve. Maybe let's get this turned on and see what we can do with it. Oh, I need that switchy thing there too. Maybe that's what why don't you just do that. That's okay. Then we're trying to turn this in a way so most of you can see this. Okay, Mary, can you get the lights just a little bit?
You're already on it.
Okay, you got to go to play mode, yeah. Okay, there we go, great, fantastic. Okay, nutrition, where from, where to? I've really actually become very fascinated with the whole question concerning the history of nutrition, the history of medicine. I'm talking about going back at least decades, a few centuries, maybe in, quite frankly, according to a couple of thousand years. And it's in the history, actually, where I have actually learned some of my best lessons, because I've been asking myself, how come this information is so powerful, what we can do now, and is so little known? Why has it been held in the background? I'm not going to deal with that topic tonight, but at least that was the basis for that question. This slide, Steve. Okay, here's the way I want to approach it. I mean, there's a million different ways I could approach this topic. I want to share with you as I look back in my career, doing lots of research, having lots of students and all kinds of projects and so forth and so on. As I look back, there are in my view at least, two ideas that the public has basically been assuming that is not correct. Let me start out with that first, because without our knowing, these two issues, then it's hard to make progress. It's hard to explain things going forward. So one idea is that protein, the more the better. How many of you have actually tried this? You told your friends or your family, and somebody comes back to you and say, where do I get my protein from? How many of you heard that? Right, it's very consistent. It's actually been a dominant idea in the professions as well. Always emphasizing protein. You can see it historically, and I wish I had the time to share some of those exciting stories with you. So that's one idea. Let's get this corrected. And I also picked this out too, because much of my early research, in fact, dealt with exactly this question. And incidentally, when I started my career, as I say now, 57 years ago, I had a view that was exactly opposite what I now have. So I was prejudiced in the beginning. It was actually the data itself and the findings that sort of got me turned around, if you will. The second one is this idea here. A little bit hard to explain, but I hope to illustrate in a moment. When people think about what is nutrition, we don't think very well about nutrition. We're very confused about nutrition as far as the society is concerned on one hand. But when we think about it, we're talking about individual nutrients usually, and oftentimes about specific amounts of nutrients being consumed and used, if you will. So much of our narrative, much of our discussion, much of our research, much of our practice in this field is largely focused on what individual nutrients do. So we study them, we lecture about them. I lectured myself for many years in upper class nutrition courses. talking about individual nutrients one by one. There's vitamin C, and there's vitamin D, and there's this and there's that, and here's what it does. So we focus on that question. We've done that too much. We've done that too much, and it's been actually quite misleading. Let's go on to the next one. So now I want to tell you just a little bit about the question concerning our misassumptions, if you will, our overemphasis on the consumption of protein in particular. Here's some studies here. In this particular case, it was an experimental animal study at this point in time, and I don't have the time to go into all the reasons why we got involved in this. It started out when I was working in the Philippines, or helping to organize a nationwide program for feeding malnourished children. When we saw some ideas there, I noticed some things that began to question whether protein was as important as it really was, particularly in reference to its association with cancer. So in fact, coming back from the Philippines in those days, with some information in hand, I organized a project that was funded by the National Institutes of Health at NIH, a project that then was to continue for the next 27 years. And we studied this question in great depth, we published a lot of papers on it. I'm just going to show you just a couple little snapshots of a couple of things we learned. A couple of things we learned that really challenged my early life sort of thoughts, if you will. So here, what I want to show you here, here's the effect of dietary protein feeding on early cancer in experimental animals. And these animals are divided into two groups. One is fed 20% of total calories as protein. In other words, let's say 20% protein diet. The other is fed 5%. Now this was generally considered the recommendations for good health. This was a little bit too low. And in this particular experiment, both sets of animals were actually genetically initiated to give rise to cancer. So they're primed, genetically speaking, to actually begin the cancer process, if you will. And a lot of, in those days, we thought, and still today, unfortunately, even in the New York Times, even today, there was really a rather annoying article, the lead article in the New York Times, as a matter of fact, about the idea that genes cause cancer. Heard that story? I'm challenging that. I really want to challenge that idea. So, let's go back to the experiment then. So we have animals that are genetically initiated to give rise to cancer. They were fed two different levels of protein, a good level and a low level. This came out of some observations a little bit before that suggested that cancer in this particular case would be promoted, would be affected. It would tend to grow more if we fed low levels of protein. In other words, it was almost considered a protein deficiency disease. Well, what did we see? First off, if animals are fed 20% protein during this first 12 weeks after the genetic lesion is put in place, they're fed 20% protein. That dotted line there indicates how those cancers grow. In contrast, if we go back, and as we did, to go back and do it a second time, do 20%, then 5%, 20. What you can see there is very clear. We could actually turn on and turn off cancer development in a rather dramatic way. We did this in very sundry ways. Simply by the feeding of protein. All of a sudden, saying to me at least, it was almost heretical in a sense. The animals fed the higher levels of protein, the good levels, the things that we all aspire to, if you will. The animals fed the higher levels of protein, the cancer was growing well and robustly throughout the life of the animal until they got a lot more cancers, in spite of the fact that both sets of animals had been exposed to the same genetic susceptibility. So let's try another one now, Steve. So as I was going through the years, I kept running into these problems where I make an observation. We find out something in our experiments that seemed to be at odds with what was in the textbooks. Absolutely at odds with what, who would have thought this? That protein actually can turn on cancer. And so I considered it myself, certainly my colleagues, I can tell you, thought of that. It was nothing more than a heresy. This could not be right, it's wrong. So I thought we sort of find one heresy after another. Eventually I got to a point where I said, hey, there are lessons. There are principles of something new here. So I'm going to tell you this in the form of lessons. Lesson number one, nutrition controls cancer growth. In a broader sense, protein in this case is controlling. Okay, let's take another stab at this. Here's another question. And mind you, I'm only just picking out just a few things off the top. This story is really fascinating if you get into the depth of the material. When we, in medicine, actually, in medicine or, just stay back here, in medicine or medical research, when we're studying how, let's say, a cause can produce an effect, right? A cause can produce an effect. In this case, protein is the cause, cancer is the effect. When we look at a cause-effect relationship in biology and medicine in particular, one of the things we all like to do is we like to understand how does it work? What kind of mechanism is involved? What kind of biochemical mechanism? Is it some enzyme? Is it a hormone? Is it this or is that? So we started looking at what the mechanism was, because if you see a protein promoting cancer, something so provocative as that, we want to know what the mechanism is, so we look for it. Okay, Steve? So it turned out that in this early stage of cancer, incidentally, I forgot to tell you, this is the trajectory of cancer growth. From the beginning, initiation, then cancers are growing. At the end, you get the more serious kind. And so we're looking for the explanatory mechanism. And this is a list of things, quite technical. It won't go into this. But it turns out every time we look for the mechanism of how this genetic lesion back here grew into a cancer, it turned out at least in this early stage, every time we looked for a mechanism, we found one. I couldn't put my finger on what was responsible for this mechanism. This is an increase in an enzyme that makes function oxidase and actually activates chemical carcinogens that give rise to cancer. This has to do with the product of that reaction binding to the DNA of the genes. And then, of course, we found that the protein, in this particular case, it increased its enzyme activity. The higher protein diet increased the binding, suppressed the repair of it, to be honest about it. It actually affected the transport of the chemical carcinogen into the cell. It altered the structure of the enzyme, so forth and so on. I don't want to get carried away with this too far, but every time we looked for a mechanism, we found one. Now, so we, in this stage, so we said, okay, let's look at the second stage. This is called promotion. Once again, when we started looking for the biochemical explanation of this phenomenon, we found one. It got to a point, in fact, at my point in time, at least, this was about, let's see, when was this? The early 1980s. This is many years ago now. In the early 1980s, I had gotten to a point where it was frustrating. I couldn't figure out, what was the mechanism on the one hand. On the other hand, I'm being urged and pushed by my colleagues. You've got to tell us what the mechanism is, otherwise we're not going to believe it, in a sense. So, as they say, it was frustrating when all of a sudden that thought occurred. And I think this may have been one of the most prominent things for me over the years that really began to change my thinking, a whole new, different worldview. Namely, there was no such thing as the mechanism. There was a whole bunch of things going on, almost simultaneously, all interconnected to create the response. And so it was a very different sort of dynamic, a different kind of thought process. Just A doesn't cause B by doing, something in between. There are all kinds of things happen. So can I go to the next one here? I'll come back to that in a moment. Lesson number 2, Newton's act number 1, but countless mechanisms as in a symphony, for example. As in a symphony, putting a lot of, let's say, instruments together and, infinite combinations of notes and so forth, and actually getting a symphony of it. I like that metaphor because I think it works quite well in this situation. So, then we came to another provocative idea. I was until, let's say, about it was about the middle 1980s, I guess. I was using a protein that we all of us in research just tend to use automatically. It was available, it was convenient, we could purchase it. And so then I said, wait a minute, let's see if other proteins do this too. The protein that we were using to increase the cancer was casein, which is the main protein of cow's milk. At this point in time, I'm really now getting in trouble because I had come from a dairy farm, milking cows. And so, to sort of have to base this proposition that somehow the milk that we have been producing, primarily for the purpose of making sure we get enough protein, we got a problem. The protein in the cow's milk was turning on this cancer. So we said, okay, let's try soy and wheat, a couple of plant proteins. They did not do it, even when it was fed at this good level of 20%. So all of a sudden, here was emerging an idea that we had to follow up on in many, many different ways. And don't have a chance to get into the details of this, but it turned out the animal-based proteins were actually turning on cancer. The plant-based proteins were not, to put it very simply. And we studied, we worked a lot on how the mechanism was. All of a sudden, that was opening a door. Maybe the nutrients that are present in animal-based foods are kind of different from plant-based foods. Let's carry that idea forward a little bit here. So Casey and I are going to suggest, and I lectured on this question in the best research institutes around the world on this, who actually do this kind of work, and have not been challenged. Namely, that casein is the most relevant chemical carcinogen ever identified. How many of you, except for those who read the book, how many of you have heard that the cow's milk protein is a carcinogen? I mean, talk about something that's provocative and getting people to think. That takes the cake. Okay, next. So now I want to turn your attention a little bit because I'm focused on a question concerning protein. You know, our overemphasis about protein. Here was an experiment here showing how if we fed different levels of protein, let's say animals that again had been exposed to a carcinogen with genetic initiation, as we fed 4, 6, 8, and 10% protein. No problem. What that says to feeding that level of protein, no problem. In fact, it illustrated the fact that protein is an essential nutrient. We need protein, obviously. That's not the question. Even though in this particular case here, no cancers are growing, it turns out when we exceeded the amount that it generally needed, that's when the cancers started growing. So we had to make a course correction here in a sense. It wasn't just protein causing cancer. It was actually in fact, our requirement for protein is actually less than this, but in any case, the question is, what kind of foods provide the ideal level of protein? Is plant-based foods. What you're eating right here, in fact, if you were to do a calculation of how much protein you're consuming, as long as there wasn't too much of a fume thrown into the body, the amount of protein that you would be consuming in this particular case is somewhere in this territory here. Compare that with what we actually do as a society. We're over here someplace. And the reason that we're over here, most of us, is because, quite frankly, 70% of our total protein in our diets, on average, comes from animal-based foods. So all of a sudden, this begins to challenge, whole notions about protein. Protein is not just an animal-based food. In fact, for a long time, and still today, for many people, when you say protein, people tend to think of meat. They tend to think of animal-based foods, right? No, plants have plenty of protein. So you eat plants, you eat protein, so what? Now, let's talk about these foods a little bit because it's kind of steering us in a direction that's really getting kind of exciting here. Plant-based foods have other things too. They not only have the right amount of protein, they're the foods that have all this antioxidants and complex carbohydrates and fat at the right levels. Animal-based foods are almost the opposite. So all of a sudden here now we're getting a sort of a bifurcation. Plant-based foods, the one thing, not just with respect to protein, but lots of other things, animals does something different. Okay, that's right. And here's just a description to show you how different plant-based foods are from animal-based foods in terms of this nutrient composition. Plant-based foods make the antioxidants. Firstly, all antioxidants are made by plants. Complex carbohydrates only made by plants. Two groups of substances, hundreds, thousands of combinations of these things. These are good, this is good stuff. This is where we actually see the benefits that we can see when we eat plants against preventing certain diseases and maintaining health. Vitamins, according to the classical definition, vitamins is a substance you have to consume. If you can't make it, I'm saying, if you think of it that way, vitamins are only made in plants. So here's what plants are doing for us. Loaded. This is a really positive part of the story. It's just loaded with all this good stuff. Countless things in here. Fat and protein is at a level, what I just suggested a moment ago, about the right level, right time. Animal-based foods are very different. So here's the point I want to drive home. Animal-based foods and plant-based foods are entirely different classes of food. Here is where we get the benefits. We don't get it over here. That's right. Oh. Yeah, one more thing. I gotta throw in here another idea, very important. Processed foods. Processed foods, I'm sure you recognize, are the kind of things, the convenience stores, you stop along the store, the gas stations, all that kind of stuff. Processed foods can be almost anything. Fast food, processed foods, they slap them together, even though they may be made of a plant nutrients, if you will, like sugar or white flour or good oil from that. Even though it may be plant, if it's put in that form, then those kind of foods have altogether the wrong proportions of these things, and causes a great deal of trouble. So here we have three classes of food the way I like to look at it. Got animal-based foods, you can look at it that way. You can look at processed foods, you have another way is too. But these are very negative stories here. I could stand here for the next year and talk about all the evidence against these two kinds of foods. Very negative message. There's a positive side. And this was exciting, right here. All plant-based foods. That's what has the good stuff. And it's almost infinite in its complexity and in terms of the kind of stuff it has. That's what it is. Okay, so I'm sure I haven't fully convinced you of this, but the question concerning protein, it's our reverence for protein. I'd like to use that word reverence. We have almost worshipped that nutrient ever since it was discovered in 1839. And we center our thinking around making sure we get enough protein. All the time, think we only get it from animal-based foods. I think you know where I'm going. So this whole concept of basically worshiping protein, so that's where I'm challenging. Now let's look quickly at the nutrients in isolation, was another source of some really difficult thing. We think of individual nutrients. I mean, I taught it this way myself. We did our research on this. Looking at individual chemicals, if you will, in a sense in isolation. And looking at great depth, it's the best of science, if you don't mind to say so. So, individual nutrients have become part of our thinking, part of our entire narrative. I mean, for example, recommended intakes, recommended daily allowances, RDAs, which you probably know about. I mean, they're all defined in terms by this National Academy of Science report that's basically reviewed every 5 years. It's defined so that reference intakes for all these vitamins. We know exactly, supposedly, how much we should consume, and we focus on one nutrient at a time. That's what drives food labeling and all the rest. Go to the next slide, please. Here's food labeling. Look at the label. We've got different kinds of nutrients here, exactly amounts here, as if they mean something. I know something about this because I was on the committee, the expert panel that actually revised this at one point in time. Prior, it was more complicated before. I was on this National Academy panel, actually coming up with a more systematic and simple way of looking at this. I wanted to not let us do away with that. Not totally, but at least reduce it down to the bare minimum. Instead of talking about all these individual nutrients, as if the exact quantity meant something. It doesn't. A lot of people think that's the best of science. I think it's the worst of science. In many ways, it's the worst of science, getting so focused on these individual things that we can't even tell at any moment in time. When you take a forkful of food here or a spoonful, you can't know exactly how much nutrient is there. And the amount there anyhow doesn't relate very well to the amount that actually functions in our body. Our body decides on how much to actually digest, absorb, and use, and put in the right place. Okay, so all of our focus on individual nutrients has ended up creating an enormous industry, about $30 billion industry. Nutrient supplements themselves is probably worth $11, $12 billion, I think the figure somewhere around there in each state. It's a huge industry. And I've also seen that grow, just as all the vitamin supplements that you see on the shelves. People call that nutrition. No, that's drug therapy. It's just sort of taking chemicals a little bit in advance of, let's say, whatever problems we're fearing. And so we now know nutrient supplements are really not working. And I've got a personal interest in this because at the beginning of the industry, back in the 1980s, I was asked by the National Academy of Science to be the chief witness in federal court hearings on the validity of these claims at the time. So I followed it. I said then that it didn't make sense biologically, but the industry went ahead anyhow and produced this stuff and sold the idea to the American public. And most people now, at least 50%, are using nutrient supplements in one form or another, when in reality they really don't work. So this whole idea of talking about individual chemicals, you know, I suppose there are some who think, in fact, have said, someday we won't need to eat food, all we need to do is eat these chemicals. It's a disaster to even think that way, but that's a problem. Next slide, please. It's a source of great confusion. You say this. Now I'm getting to the point, when you think about individual numbers, individual numbers, that creates confusion. Because there are a lot of people looking at something out of context. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, as if that's the whole story. It's not. So here's a little summary. Emphasize protein consumption. I especially animal-based foods. That's a misassumption. Encourage nutrient supplementation and food fortification. Again, it's a problematic idea. So nutrition is not understood, it's not part of the health. It leads to this idea here, that nutrition somehow has never been understood. It's not a subject in medical schools, too, because people want to think of nutrition in terms of these individual nutrients and end up arguing a great deal about them and looking at their activities sort of in a sense out of isolation. So there's something else here. Let's go on another one. So here's my nutrition definition. Countless good constituents working together when we actually consume food, and I mean by countless, who knows the number? Tens, hundreds of thousands of different kind of chemicals that are either nutrients or nutrient-like that happen to work together in a symphony. That's my thing. And as a result of thinking of it that way, food, nutrient composition, things work together. It turns out a broad variety of disease conditions are prevented. Heart disease, cancer, diabetes, you name it. Next one, please. So when added to some exercise, obviously an important idea, with rest, hydration, sunshine, nutrition is greater than the sum of its parts. There's a lot of it in the symphony. The nutritional effect is so powerful when you think of it this way. It is so powerful, there's so much to offer, which is quite, as I say, in contrast to what we do. Next slide. Okay, so working together. It leads to this concept here. Instead of talking about nutrients in terms of one chemical at a time, which I call reductionist research, that's what science has become, unfortunately, in this business. I'm talking about, let's call it holistic nutrition. And by the way, if you look in the dictionaries I have done for this new book that we just did, if you look in the dictionary to spell, for the spelling of holism, I think most of you know it's spelled H-O-L-I-S-M. It's really an interesting idea. Why is it spelled that way? Because when it is spelled that way, that tends to conjure up ideas, I think you would agree, about something being holy, sort of religious in a sense, and all of a sudden we end up with a confrontation between science and religion, as a matter of fact, when it's spelled that way. So I had thought that I want to go back and sort of consider the history of this idea of holism. And for me, it meant really whole. Put the W back in there again. So I'm actually redefining the word, if you will. Put the W in there, let's talk about it that way. Involves multiple nutrients, mechanisms, disease reversals, all of that converge and produce a whole variety, 8,000 different diseases according to the ICD code. But in reality, I'd like to call it one disease. We've divided and fractioned it up in all these different names, as if we're going to learn a great deal about each one. Now, coming to that point of view, here we listed incidentally, my son, our youngest son, is the one who co-authored the book, The China Study, with me, and many of you may know the story, but he was in theater. He was actually an actor on stage in Chicago, great writer, not in science. He came back just trying to earn a little money when we were working on that book. He got so excited about it, he decided to go back to medical school. So he did, finished up his medical degree. He's now just about 1 month away from finishing his residency in the same field. So he's going to be doing the same thing I'm doing in a sense. But while we were writing the book, we went back and looked at the literature because I wanted to know if this information is as powerful as what we were learning it to be. How long has this been known? That's a question I got asked a lot of times. I haven't heard this before. I still get to ask these questions in medical, in audiences with grand rounds and medical audiences like that. It's another entirely different topic, but when you start thinking about, was this known from before, it turns out all these things here actually there is evidence. It's in the peer-reviewed literature, in the medical literature, if you will, certainly in the biomedical literature. There's evidence actually published sometime during the last 40, 50, 60, 70 years that actually suggested, even almost, if I can make the point, almost proved that the kind of nutrition I'm talking about, whole plant-based foods, could actually prevent this stuff. Almost suggesting there's a symphony amongst all of these things. It has a common causation, not single nutrients, by the way. It's things working together from certain classes of foods. But all this stuff here is tended to respond to the same kind of mischief that we do when we consume the wrong food. So here's what I'd like to say. The whole plant-based foods, when sustained, you got to keep doing it. You can't start this thing as if you're doing some treatment and then go off it. You got to keep on doing it, stay with it. So you allow your body to accommodate and adjust to taste preferences and things. So when it's sustained, it prevents, suspends, and it cures all these, and it's in a peer-reviewed research literature, which is the kind of evidence I like to rely on, is that. Anyhow, it's a very exciting idea. Next slide, please. So another principle here, let's call it whole food, plant-based diet, nutritional effects is a very broad spectrum of effect. There's something really fundamental about our bodies. It's able to reach out, this phenomenon to reach out and actually create so much health in just one fell swoop just by deciding what to eat. Next slide, please. Okay, in addition to treating disease, which we've been talking about before, you know, our grandmothers and our mothers told us, eat your vegetables. They had something there, by the way. They were on the right track, for sure. But that was mostly in regard to, if you eat this, you're not going to get such and such a disease in the future, more or less. And we didn't pay a lot of attention to that, I think, based on the history that now is coming up to us. What is exciting about this is the future. What is really exciting about this is that this diet, which we know can prevent lots of future diseases, is this same kind of diet that can be used to treat existing disease in one manner or another. And from the holistic perspective, broad spectrum of diseases, to rapidly, I mean, all of this points to, and that's what we suggest in the China study, all this points to a dramatic, major effect of food, one consumed the right way, to create this healthy response. In other words, the effect is broad, most diseases are prevented, suspended, cured, but it's acting. This is an exciting concept here. If you're sick, you've got high cholesterol, high LDL, especially here if you have maybe high blood sugar, maybe blood hypertension problems, you've got some real pain of various systemic kinds. What is now turning out, and I'm seeing this with my physician colleagues in particular, but we saw the same thing in animals. What we're now finding out is that this effect is surprisingly fast in a way in which it can act. It can counter, it can actually, when people start this, their cholesterol levels down like that within a week or two. It's really fast. That's an interesting concept because we tend to think only drugs can do that. I'm saying food can do it far, far better. It's vital, obviously, guests are spared, and here's a big deal. No known side effects. All drugs have side effects. This doesn't have side effects. So we're getting this benefit across the board, happening fast, and at the same time, avoiding side effects. Okay, so I'm talking about nutrition therapy, not just, not drug therapy. Here's where the rubber hits the road. I have to tell you, it's all about foods, not about drugs. It's about maintaining our own health, taking our own responsibility, and being well. That's really what it is. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to say the practice of medicine, too, is also very reductionist. It focuses on one thing at a time. And here's the problem with, I would suggest, in the practice of medicine. One of the major problems, we tend to think one thing at a time does something. We usually think in terms of some particular drug doing something in particular. It's totally out of context. Not totally out of context, but very much out of context. We think about single causes, whether they're carcinogens or genes. We think about biomarkers, whether it's serum things measured in the blood, blood cholesterol, blood sugar, single diseases, and which all, in fact, this kind of thinking, this reduction thinking, encourages discovery and use of single drugs, foreign chemicals used out of context. And there's a whole lot, there's a big story here about this, but anyhow, it's a very different way of thinking. Next slide, please. Now, I hope I can move on here. I'm taking up too much time, I think. Okay, let's look at that again and see what we get here. Oh, this is looking at it, I would suggest from the sort of 30,000 foot level. Looking at our current system the way it is now. We tend to consume expensive foods that sicken us. Let's be candid about this. We're doing it. That's what we're doing. They're expensive because the real cost of these foods, animal-based foods I'm talking about, the real costs in large measure are subsidized by government subsidies, us taxpayer dollars. We're using our taxpayer dollars to subsidize the production of foods that kill us. That's what it comes down to. It's that simple. That's a big problem. Then we turn around, once we get sick, we maintain a good level of sickness in our society. Then we turn around and treat sickness with single chemicals. Either in an early disease stage, as with nutrient supplements, they don't really work, or in the late stage, as with drugs. And of course, we get fast side effects in the process. This is our health system, our health industry system. And there's not one particular sector of our society that's doing this. We're all part of it. You know, it's the way we think. I was suggesting, and so we've all got to sort of take some responsibility for this. And in this whole thing here, we're ignoring nutrition. That's right. Now, what I want to do, okay, I'll add one more here. I think this is what Hippocrates meant 2,500 years ago, when he said, let food be my medicine and medicine be like food. And in fact, if you go back into the ancient Greek literature, I've looked at some of this, Pythagoras, Socrates, Plato, you name it. They knew this to a great extent about consuming plant-based foods, and somehow we got away from that. And so the history of this field has actually gone down the wrong track. Now, what I want to do to just briefly summarize for you here is to repeat, I guess I could say it again. I'm obviously really convinced that if the public can get to know this, we can cause a transformation in our thinking in this country, solving lots and lots of problems, not just for ourselves, but if we can actually begin to solve societal problems. The cost of health care. The cost of health care per capita in this country is the highest in the world. It's twice as high as the second highest. But at the same time, our society ranks somewhere down around 35th or 40th in terms of quality of health care. Something's wrong. So we're paying all this money down here, and so that's what we got to deal with. And so I want to get this out to the public. There's only really one way. I naively thought for a while, because I had worked at fairly senior levels in the government for some years, I used to think until about maybe 5-10 years ago that, gosh, if we could just get CEOs of companies who have their own health care plans, or maybe we could just get a few Congress people, you know, to buy into this idea, we get some change. How naive I was. It's not true. Not the way to do it. Because the leaders of our society are beholden to the forces that exist. Their job is to maintain the structure as it exists, to maintain the status quo. You stop and think about it. Usually through votes, but also, of course, through money. So the only way that we're going to be able to do this is take it in our own hands. Build a system. Build a system so that we all can get to know this. And it's so powerful. And when people see it, and they try it for themselves, then they're going to go run out and start telling other people about it. So my sons and I and a daughter, my wife is behind a lot of this too, you know, and college. We have some really wonderful college. Dr. John McDougall has been at this for, gosh, 4 decades now. Dr. Caldwell Esses did in the book, the surgeon, my very good friend. And a number of other physicians are really coming on board. Dr. Fry, as a matter of fact, we met what was it 3 years ago or something, already getting into sort of doing work with his patients this way, and he can tell you lots of stories himself. So the only way we can do this is it's got to be grassroots. We've got to work at that level. So what are we doing? I'm going to just tell you a few things we're doing here. This is one of the reasons I'm here too, is to share with you, because as we go forward doing these things, and thinking about all of it working together, the whole, it takes capital to move along. But at the same time, as we do that, whatever we produce has got to be financially stable itself. I believe in the free market system, obviously. And so what we need to do is to create projects that can financially sustain themselves. Now, let me tell you, here's the sort of sequence of things, the way we think about this. Information alone is not enough to cause people to change. Not very many people really change. They can hear me rant and rave, for ad infinitum, and they're not necessarily going to change too much. Some people do. If we turn around, though, after this first stage of informing, it's a necessary first stage, then we take the information and say, okay, come here, we'll show you how to do this. We'll control your food intake. We've done that, by the way. We can take a group of people, my oldest son has done this, the oldest has done this. You take a group of people and watch them change. You control their food for as little as 5 to 10 days, 15 days maybe maximum. Major things happen. Now they feel it. Now they've experienced it. Now you're engaging them far more from here to here. Then the big challenge is, okay, they're interested in making behavior change. But our society doesn't encourage this all that much. It's not that easy to stay with it, as I'm sure you recognize. So the trick here is to come up with some systems to sustain that behavior change. And as I say, we're doing that. Our oldest son is coming up with some of the tricks to make that happen. And it has to be done in such a way that if you do it with a group of people, here, maybe in Phoenix, everybody gets enthused about it. They can see what the results are. The next village down or next town down the road is going to see what happens. Saving healthcare costs, seeing tremendous health benefits. They want to do the same thing. I think you'll agree. That's grassroots. You can do it that way. Just like that. Okay, so information. Let's see different ways of creating information. Here's the China study book that was published now over 8 years ago. Actually, this is done far better than I ever thought it would. It's we've actually there's more than 1 million copies have been sold with no PR effort. This is done quite nicely. Here's the China study cookbook coming out. That's our daughter coming out on next Tuesday. And here's the new book, whole, that I'm trying to pull it together in terms of philosophy. Not only the philosophical, historical, and scientific context to talk about the whole. It really doesn't make a difference in this way. Still information, another form of information. The online course is essential but not sufficient. This information, if you will. Let's look at this online course briefly. We had one testimony here. I want to just fill you in a little bit of details here for a moment. It's in my name, 501. It's a nonprofit foundation partnering with the arm of Cornell University that does these kind of programs, puts online courses on, puts courses on online from all the way from business to engineering to whatever. Next slide, please. It's a kind of deal where when we get a class together, a virtual class of, let's say, 30 students, that class then we assign a professional nutritionist, professional educator to that class, and then to carry the discussion on for 2 weeks on each class. And so it's a very interactive learning experience. And we now have been authorized to offer 30 Category 1 continuing medical education credits for health professionals like physicians. And about a third of our students right now are physicians and primary care workers. It's an instructor monitored discussion, so it's an exciting, interactive kind of thing. Next one, please. It involves specifically 3 2-week courses, 18 total lectures. One gets a certificate at the end of this program from Cornell. We've had about 3,000 graduates. Next slide. Now I just want to tell you, we've had great success with this, and from my perspective, I don't think it's that great yet. We're going to be really making it much better. We want to upgrade the quality of the lectures, number one, and number two, we want to add a lot more courses. So we're really anxious to get on with that. This program has done really well financially. We have been able to earn enough to keep it running. So it's really grounded now. We can prove that point. So all we are now talking about is raising more money to take us to the next level. It's like, secondary IPOs, if you will, in the business world. You take on some extra money, kick it up to the next level, and whatever level it works at, I think is going to be quite good. The online program at Cornell University is considered now as one of the top 10 university online programs in the country. And they're offering about 200 courses, actually over 200 courses right now. Our course is actually number one out of those 200. And so we're really gratified by how successful this joint thing has become. And I know we can make it even a lot better. One more, I think, for that. So we have needs for funding. And I just want to throw that up for you, any of you who may be interested in this possibility. It's a nonprofit donation in this particular case. And expansion to medical schools. I've actually been talking to some medical schools, big medical schools in this country, who are expressing some interest to use this course to educate their students, and particularly their residents in Wichita County. So I think we could have a big effect on transforming the way we think of this country about working through the medical system. This is very gratifying here. So we're looking for, you might think that's a lot of money, but actually in this scheme of things, it's not that much. That's why to kick us up that level. Okay, so there's another idea we want to do with our foundation too, is research. We need to do a peer-reviewed research study that's comprehensive in scope, professionally done. And what we do is we've already done this, but we want to be able to do it in a way in which it'll actually get published so that policymakers can look at this. It gets published in the very best journals and look at this and say, wow, this really works, instead of getting really documented, not the hearsay, not the sort of scattered kind of discussion we tend to have amongst each other from time to time. There's a lot of loose ends. I want to do it in a systematic way to show how well it works. You're told how about 3 years finance published top tier. And the amount of funding that we're talking about this, in case of anybody here, or if you know of people who have this kind of funding, we're talking about at least $1 million to kick that off the ground, depending on how much money will be put in by a partner at the medical school level. We got all the medical schools to do this. Next slide, please. Okay, I guess I already said that. Yeah, funding needs, that's what it is. Okay, next slide, please. Now, one final thing we're doing. One thing I should tell you. We could actually focus our efforts just teaching. And we can be satisfied with that, I think. But the problem with just teaching this information, or the questions like that, okay, I heard this, I get it. Now what do I do? I mean, most of the students actually say that when they leave. Tell us what we can do next. We got some good ideas for what they can do. They can participate in this part of the program. All we want to do is get them educated and then offer the additional part. Without the additional part, I think an effort like this sometimes can get lost, or it takes a very long time to get things going. So we have a marketplace program. This is headed up by our two oldest sons. Some other folks in the country do something similar to this too. We have a very unique way of doing this, I think. It would incorporate convenience, affordability, behavior change, incentives, and so forth, and be scalable. Do it here, and you can see how well it works, and then you can do it in one community. So in that particular case, I'm suggesting this is a very different sort of funding arrangement. This is more, for those of you familiar with the business world, this is more of an equity investment. In other words, people who might be interested in participating on an equity level, take shares, and that kind of thing in this sort of effort. I can give you more detailed information on that. Okay, one more. Yes, and my son's name here is. Okay, so we've got here's what we have. I think that's it. If I'm mistaken, is that one more? Yeah. Learn it, live it, do it. It's just that simple. So we're trying to think about this program and its various parts, starting with the foundation of what it does, the education and research, and then over here sort of organizing an effort to actually put in place. That has to be in a for-profit sector. Actually, the other does too. It's basically got to be organized in a fashion that can sustain itself in such ways. So I talked too long. I didn't mean to go on quite this long, but I had two tasks to do. One was for those of you who may not be familiar with this information, just to get a little bit of why I get so enthusiastic about this, but on the other hand, also to tell you where we hope to go next. And I think what we have in our hands right now is something, in my view, I dare say, I think we have good a program as there is in the country to actually cause change in a major way in terms of getting this information going forward. So any of you want to come on board, participate in any way that you feel comfortable with, we'd be delighted to talk to you. Thank you.
Hold on to the microphone. Cassie told me that there were people who wanted questions and answers. So depending upon how many questions